Hi, welcome to all of you. Welcome to SPY 25. Welcome to Amsterdam. We are actually in a rather festive mood, or let's frame it slightly different. This is a special day for Amsterdam. It's an historical day, actually. Exactly 20 years ago, exactly this day 20 years ago, the first same-sex couples got married in Amsterdam. And those were the first couples in the world that got married. And afterwards, already 27 countries has followed. So a festive day in Amsterdam. My name is Jan-Willem Duivendak. I'm director of NIAS. And NIAS is the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Studies in the Humanities and in the Social Sciences. This is what we call a NIAS Talk. It is cooperation between NIAS and SPY 25. Each year, 60 fellows stay at NIAS to carry out their research. And they mostly do that so individually, but we also have some programs. And in that cases, people still carry out their own research, but they do so in close cooperation with partners. And today we are presenting a program with a partner, the municipality of Amsterdam. Those fellows are called urban fellows. So let me tell you something about the Urban Citizen Fellowship. Together with the municipality of Amsterdam, the Urban Citizen Fellowship is set up to stimulate the use of advanced research in political deliberation and public policy making for the city of Amsterdam. And at the end of their fellowships, as you will hear tonight, the scholars formulate an advice that contributes to the development of citizenship in Amsterdam. So let me say somewhat more about tonight's theme. Tonight, we are going to answer a couple of questions, or at least to discuss. How can citizens of Amsterdam increase their says in the city's development? Democratization, representation, and inclusivity are high on the political agenda of public officials in Amsterdam. And although the intention is to let citizens have their say in certain policy matters and to create short communication lines between citizens and governmental organizations, this is easier said than done. So how do processes of democratization play out in different scenarios of citizen engagement and participation that you will hear about tonight? In this NIAS talk, we explore what contemporary urban citizenship actually means in light of the increasing emphasis on democratization within the Dutch, but indeed particularly within Amsterdam. We do so together with Urban Citizenship Fellows, Nanke Verloo, Anouk de Koning, and Markha Valenta. And with them, we investigate how the relation between citizen and state takes shape today, focusing specifically on the Dutch capital. In the years 2020 and 2021, these three social scientists carried and carry out research on the topic of democratization. What do citizen-state relations look like in what's often called the participation society? What are the limits to democratization and what does this mean for contemporary citizenship? Well, I admit a lot of questions, so you will be eager to hear what the researchers found in their research. But before we will hear from the three urban fellows, let me shortly explain the program. Before we will hear from them, we first give the floor to Caroline Nevian in a couple of minutes. I'm almost finished. And she will introduce the program. And then we hear from the three urban fellows. And then the older man of Amsterdam who's responsible for this program, Rutger Groot-Wassink, will respond to the three presentations of Anouk de Koning, Nanke Verloo, and Markha Valenta. Caroline Nevian, who is Chief Science Officer of the City of Amsterdam and Professor by Special Appointment at the University of Amsterdam, where she focuses on designing urban experience. As Chief Science Officer, Nevian oversees the civil servants and researchers can find each other and invent different and new ways of working together. She will briefly speak about the importance of the cooperation with the urban fellows. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jan Willem. Thank you. Good evening. Yes, it's an honor to be here, and it's also an honor to see that because our elder Markha Wassink, deputy mayor, decided to do this, which is quite unusual, to find a forum where we have more time to think deeper and reflect deeper on what is actually happening. You see that in Amsterdam, as in many other European cities, there is something invented like a chief science officer. We have different names, but we all have the task to bring the connection between the challenges in the city, the policymakers, and the researchers who are working on these challenges. In Amsterdam, we want to build a sustainable knowledge infrastructure. And you see that often this is challenge-based. That's why we have also labeled it now city science. It's transdisciplinary between different departments, integral, and it requires new methodologies. What's very nice is that Nanke Verloo, the second fellow who will speak here tonight, was editing the book Seeing the City, gathering the different methodologies that we now use in the city, which you can access through the openresearch.amsterdam platform, if you like. But what you see is that this is all challenge-based, so we're still busy with solutions. And what's beautiful about this new fellowship, the Urban Citizen Fellows, is that we have more time to reflect on actually the relation between the government, the local government, and the people who live and visit and do business in the city. And this reflection, because it's collaboration, it emerges from a collaboration between the researchers at NIAS and the civil servants in the municipality, it's possible to obtain deeper depth quite soon. Anouk de Koning, the first fellow, and also the only one who is already wrote up her results, which you can also see on the openresearch.amsterdam platform. She really went deeply into the relation between the caregivers from the municipality and the people who require the care. And I will not anticipate any of her findings, but she wrote an essay in very accessible language, which was highly appreciated by the people who work with the children and the parents in the city of the local public health organization, GGD, and with the people, the civil servants who work really locally, like the social workers in the neighborhoods. We had also a special validation session with Anouk, and she worked together with Arti Mahesh, who was already as a civil servant doing interviews with all these people. And as a result, there is a beautiful text now, which describes the dilemmas that these people are in. And it was quite moving to see at this validation session with the civil servants that they felt they were heard in a way that was not heard before. So here we see that the fellows were capable, because of this attention and this time for reflection, offer a new perspective on a relationship that the municipality spends lots of time to evaluate it, but hardly ever has the time to really cook up a new perspective. So we are very happy that we have with NIAS this fellowship. You can see there is a lot of need in research. You can also see it in the news. Researchers are, scientists are all the time at all the tables. The question is really, what is it? I mean, is it more opinions? Any opinion you can find a researcher who will back it up. It also shows that we live in a time with a lot of uncertainty and people don't know. So they think, I don't know it, so I need research. But the essence of research in the city is really the reflection between the different stakeholders, the different perspectives, to come to a new understanding of the situation that we are in. And I'm very, I don't know, not as proud to word, but I think it's really a very important contribution that Anouk de Koning, the first fellow, has really shown that there is another way of doing science in the city, with engaging with the people, and also in this engagement, making sure that things surface that otherwise in the political process, nor the policy process, often also not in the research process, surface as they do now. So I look very much also forward to the results of Nanke Verloo and Markha Valenta, who has just started. And this is a very beautiful new branch to the sustainable knowledge infrastructure that we are building in Amsterdam. Thank you.
Thanks so much for these encouraging words, Caroline, and already praise for the people who are going to speak tonight. The first who will speak to you is Anouk de Koning. She is Associate Professor in Cultural Anthropology at Leiden University. In her research at NIAS, de Koning focused on the ways in which local welfare policymakers and street-level professionals shape the relation between citizens and state. This research shows that welfare institutions and professionals need to be considered in processes of democratization. Anouk, I am not going to say more about this. It's all up to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you, Caroline and Jan-Willem, both. I'm going to share my screen. Oh. Right here. So tonight, as already announced, I want to talk to you about a desire that we all share for a better state, one that is more responsive to citizens, more respectful of them. We see such desires not only articulated in the public realm, but also within the welfare state itself, in new welfare programs that we could call a welfare state 2.0. So Jan-Willem Duivendak and his colleagues have analyzed this extensively in terms of a promise of proximity, a more nearby and more accessible, less fragmented and more human-centered welfare state. Together with my colleagues Aniek Volleberg and Milena Marchesi, I've also looked at this actually across Europe, not only in the Netherlands, but also in France and Italy. And we've called this a kind of a desire for more intimate states. So in Amsterdam, we see a similar emphasis on proximity, on an integrated approach with a human face across policy domains. So we see it in urban and neighborhood governance, in employment and activation policies, and in the case that I want to discuss here today, of the ouder and kin teams or the parent and child teams. So I did research with the parent and child teams in 2017, 2018, and I'll be speaking from that experience. Like neighborhood social teams elsewhere in the Netherlands, parent and child teams came into being in 2015 when both the social assistance and youth welfare were transferred to municipalities, the responsibility for it. And what we saw at the time is that neighborhood social teams were presented as the solution to several problems in the welfare system. They would combat fragmentation and disconnects in an overly complex welfare landscape. They would empower citizens. They would empower citizens rather than overrule them, and they would allow for tailor-made solutions, and all that at lower cost. Of course, this was a huge win-win-win thinking that, as we know, didn't bear out, especially not in cost, but also in efficiency and so on. I don't want to talk about those aspects today, but about something else. So, the parent and child teams were set to provide both youth healthcare, so they were the follow-up also of the consultatiebureau, and relatively light forms of help and support to parents and children. They also monitor child and health well-being, child and youth well-being, and they are mandated to refer families, children to more specialized services. So they're really the kind of spider in the web of the kind of new municipal welfare, youth welfare systems or youth systems. Besides providing, we see, as you see here in the little map, 22 teams, each serve a particular area of the city in order to be close to the client population. And we see this emphasis on the neighborhood really in almost all welfare programs that are developed. Echoing national policy outlines, the parent and child team mission is to help children and youth to grow up healthy and safe and develop in an optimal fashion. We do that together with them, their parents and their environment, there where they are. So you see a lot of this emphasis on doing it together, right, in their environment where they are. Now, the parent and child team gives a lot of space to professionals. Professionals are in the lead. Professionals are expected to solve problems creatively, think outside the box. They're also not plagued with the much maligned auditing principle. So they don't have to keep a record of every hour that they spend. The teams are meant to be very accessible and ideally become part of the neighborhood social life. A parent and child advisor who, together with the family, designs a course of action and thereby acts as a guide and broker in a complex youth welfare system. Now, these aims and the way they are translated in practice are truly impressive. However, and of course there's always a but, these aims also produce their own dilemmas, which may well be typical of welfare 2.0. Here, I want to discuss two of these dilemmas with you. Parent and child team policy and professionals emphasized that they wanted to stand next to parents rather than prescribe what should be done. This was, for instance, expressed in the notion of zelfregie. So parents and youth were meant to direct their own care trajectory. In professional practice, we saw this translated in a downplaying of hierarchy and distance. Professionals would, for instance, express empathy with parents and stress that they were parents too, right? So they were not professionals first and foremost, but parents too. And they understood the hardships of parenting. These principles were expressed in the Perspectiefplan, the format for designing care trajectories that was adopted 1st of January in 2018. In the plan, the hulpvraag of the client's request for help, and their eigen kracht, their personal strength, were key. Now, the plan suggests that it's the voice of the family and their hulpvraag, which it expresses, right? And this has merely been unpacked in dialogue with a parent and child advisor. What this means is that the inevitable position of power of professionals and the mold of the youth system itself disappears from the picture. So we get this sense that this is the voice of the parents, but where you actually see that it's very much kind of constrained within those parameters. Moreover, the plan leaves no room for different visions or disagreements and thus enforces consensus. The second thing what we see in that case is that basically the power position and the kind of parameters are elided. There's another aspect of kind of power relations, differences and hierarchy that is not addressed, and this is more to do with race and ethnicity. So race, ethnicity is a central dimension of work in parent and child teams. Its relevance it comes from the fact that the teams that I followed at least were mostly white and middle class, and the people they worked with most closely were often poor and oftentimes non-white. So these were exactly the kind of families that we see maligned in public discourses as sources of trouble or risk. Yet, so we see here a combination of an overly white institution, even though there were some non-white professionals of color, but was a largely white institution working with a large part non-white poor families. But during the time that I did my research, there was very little explicit talk and discussion or training around race and ethnicity. And I wondered why. And this became actually a central puzzle in my research. So at the level of policy, I concluded, naming ethno-racial diversity seemed difficult. Parent and child teams were meant to serve all citizens, all Amsterdammers, right? Policies and protocols were formulated in generic terms for all parents and children. The visual language, however, which you see here, makes clear that all children is meant to encompass different colors and backgrounds, but this was only visually spoken, right? Professionals, in turn, stressed they wanted to treat people as individuals and not slot them into ethnic slots. In the context of endless failed integration talk that labels people based on their background, it was very refreshing. I was very happy to find this. But I also found that it made it almost impossible to discuss racialized and class dynamics in the encounters between professionals and parents. Now, alongside my own research, Wiebe Ruitenberg conducted research on the experiences of Egyptian migrant parents with welfare actors in Amsterdam. He found that parents often read these meetings as potentially shaped by racialized dynamics. They suspected that they were not always treated like white Dutch parents, but felt there was hardly any space to discuss their suspicions. Working with professionals myself, I found it hard to draw solid conclusions regarding the racialized dynamics because there was such a wide range of interactions and everybody seemed to kind of have to figure things out for themselves, right? Professionals had to find their own way in this. What I did find is that the silence about these issues foreclosed debate on the whiteness of the institution, not only in terms of who was employed, right, but also its norms. This middle class whiteness became most apparent in my talks with professionals of color. White middle class professionals could easily blend their professional and personal lives in their work, and they often did so. This was not the case for professionals of color. They instead articulated two we's when discussing parenting norms and practices. Yes, this is how we fill in whatever ethnic background, right? Grew up, but now we as professionals know better. To conclude, the desire for more democratic, horizontal, and more human relationships between state and citizen can stand in the way of a critical reflection on power differences. Policies aimed to create a more equal relationship between state and citizen are often phrased in very optimistic terms with ideas of co-production and self-direction. This leaves little room for the recognition of conflict between the parties involved or of institutional positions of power. An approach that aims to promote a democratic relationship can therefore end up contributing to exactly the opposite. So instead, we might want to face head-on the challenges of combining a democratic approach with what I have called a will to care for families in need. And we may want to discuss more explicitly how we reckon with inequalities of race, gender, and class in welfare provision. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anouk, for this presentation. Before I give the floor to Nanke Verloo, I just want to mention for the audience that after the reaction by the alderman, there will also be a Q&A. So please, if you have questions, just write them down, and I will explain later how we organize the Q&A, but you will get the opportunity to raise questions as well. That's just that you know that. The next speaker, the next Urban Fellow is Nanke Verloo. She is Assistant Professor of Urban Planning at the University of Amsterdam. Verloo is specialized in conflict, citizen participation, and urban democracy. At NIAS, she studied how protest and dissent can be treated as necessary elements of an inclusive democratization agenda for the city of Amsterdam. Nanke, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jan Willem. I'm sharing my screen here. Is this visible? Yes. Okay. So today I will be talking about what I call repoliticizing citizen participation. This project came out of an observation, basically. I saw that the city of Amsterdam, and especially the coalition that we have now, is really keen on democratizing the city. And they have basically two agendas there. On the one hand, they want to organize projects that allow citizens to do more in their neighborhoods, or to have a bigger voice in activities in the neighborhood, like the MAC agreement or participatory budgeting. And on the other hand, they want to focus on citizen participation and ask citizens to participate in decision-making about urban planning and also other forms of decision-making. But I also noticed that many of the projects that the municipality is at the moment organizing are really focused on that more engaging people into bottom-up approaches for communal gardening, placemaking, or cultural events, which of course are very important to make Amsterdam more democratic and also more focused on the community. But they are also rather uncontested, you could say. Everybody likes to have a community garden or to have a neighborhood festival or to do something together. But when the things become somehow more politically sensitive, it turns out that democratization is a lot more difficult. And I posted some old pictures here because, of course, we have to show that citizen participation and inspraak and all sorts of forms in which citizens have a voice is nothing new. We are doing this already very actively since the 1970s, which makes it all the more interesting to find out, why are these things still going wrong in many cases? I think all of you know of examples where citizen participation basically ended up in frustration on both sides, or in even protests and demonstrations against the project that people were participating in. And in the last years, we mostly see that in the topics of urban regeneration. So think of the example of the K-buurt in the Zuidoost. Think of the recent information that we received about the Meervaart, or about ideas for the red light district, and now also the case of an urban regeneration project in Bos en Lommer that I researched in this fellowship. But also questions around sustainability, think of the windmills, or accommodation of undocumented people, Markha will tell more about this later, are more politically sensitive topics. And here participation and then democratization turns out to be a lot more difficult than in these other projects, and they also foster more conflict. Now, what is that conflict then really about? In my project, I saw that on the one hand, participation often goes hand in hand with these formal processes, that conflict goes hand in hand with these formal participation processes. So the same citizens who are first, going to the meetings, talking about the projects, talking about the plans, giving contributions, in the end, have the feeling that the plan was already decided in advance, that they were not heard enough, that they were treated as the famous not in my backyard citizen. And they have an overall decreasing trust in the local democracy, but also in that particular participation process. And many times they start a protest movement in that moment. On the other hand, this is as frustrating, of course, for political decision makers, but also for the professionals, civil servants, people from housing corporations who are really, focusing on making a good participation process. They usually have very good intentions. They really want to listen, but they feel that the process is somehow, derailing, that they cannot find the trust from the citizens, that the citizens, start from the idea that they don't really want to listen to them, and they have to battle that throughout the process. They also have the feeling that it's a very small amount of citizens that are usually participating, and that many people are not involved in this, which also, if you look at more statistical numbers of who participates in these processes, is also the case. It shows that lower educated people usually participate less in these processes. So there is something to do there, of course, to also try to involve them and to actively invite them in other ways than has been done now. And they really feel that, they can never have everybody to like the plan. And for them, that is then, of course, frustrating, but they cannot do anything. So they go on with their vision, and they send it in the end to the municipal council to make a decision. So you see frustration on both sides. So in this fellowship, I try to figure out, okay, what goes wrong really here in these processes and what could be done better. And I looked at a case study in Bos en Lommer, which is a case study that the municipality also sort of handed over to me really nicely, because they were also wondering what has gone wrong here. They invested a lot in a participation process around the entreegebied Gulden Winkel. They really set up a very well thought through process. They hired an independent consultant. They had a lot of creative sessions, and they had also in between meetings with citizens and special groups of citizens who were not so happy with the plans to try to moderate it. So you could say this was a participation process according to the book. Nevertheless, it ended up in a contestation that is still ongoing with a group of activist citizens who call themselves now Geen Beton en Lommer, and who also have a very well going petition now against the plans that many people have signed. So I talked with 30 of the local people who were involved in this process. I observed internal meetings, I had walk and talk meetings, and I reflected on the report that I recently wrote in 3 different group meetings with citizens, civil servants, and politicians. And the report is now coming out later next week, where I give some advices on, okay, what could they have done here? And I will go through some of them. Let me check the time. Now this machine will, yeah. So what did I see here? Of course, I saw many more things, but I'm going through a couple of them. Well, first of all, what I saw is that there is a real lack of trust from both sides. And that citizens, of course, are not coming new into a process of citizen participation. They have lived there for a long time already, and they have already many experiences. These experiences frustrated them already in the past very often. So they have many emotions, and they have many doubts about what is going to happen this time. And I saw that it's, of course, for civil servants much more difficult to really acknowledge these emotions, but also to really make them part of the process. Civil servants tend to say, okay, this is very well done. Thank you very much for all your contributions. But now we are in a new process, so let's look to the future. So I give some recommendations about how you can, include these memories of the past, maybe even mourn about the neighborhood and the way it was, and also include these emotional rationales more than rationales into the process of participation. I also saw that although it has been discussed so many times and for so many years in academic literature, that still it is very difficult to make clear boundaries, to say, okay, this is what this is about, and you're not going to be able to influence on that and that, especially from this sort of idea that you want to be friendly and you want to be open because you have this democratization agenda. It happened quite often that the boundaries were somehow very unclear, and it seemed that they could respond to these things, but then really there wasn't any space to respond to, for example, the volume of the building, or where the building was going to be placed, or whether it was going to be housing or parking spaces in the first place. Well, the topic of NIMBYism is still a topic. How do we really deal with citizens who also come up for their own interests? And are they then immediately NIMBYs, or can we broaden that idea that people are maybe coming up for their interest and also for the public good? And of course, that last one is very important. Once the participation process is over, there is a black box. How is this going to be part of the vision or the plan that is coming out? And also in this case, it was not all too clear how these things were then turned into actual planning. Now, why am I saying that this is a depoliticization of citizen participation? And that's really the point I want to make here.
Very brief, very brief. Yeah.
I do it very brief indeed. I think that what is very important for Amsterdam in this moment is that we politicize these participation processes again. There is a tendency to talk in a sort of technocratic manner about the things that we are discussing, but also where the priorities really are. So there is the role of the elderman or the elder lady who could really come to these moments, of course not to every single session, but to maybe explain why some decisions in Amsterdam are prioritized more than others. And what I hear now is that basically democratization, housing, sustainability are all at the same level, and there is no choice. So citizens don't really know, what am I really talking about here? If they know that maybe housing is prioritized higher than democratization, then they can accept. But as long as this is not discussed, they will also not be able to really know whether they have influence and on what. So my recommendations are: acknowledge these emotions of the past, use the elderman in critical moments of the process, not in every participation session, but allow for that political conversation. Try to avoid technocratic language. Don't let the civil servants do everything here. They are not the ones making those decisions. They can only explain in their own language. Use political priorities to establish those contours of what people can have influence on, and then reflect again on the relationship between the central administration and the borough committees, who can now only advise, but who have a lot of knowledge of what is happening in the district. And yeah, who are now, it's for citizens very unclear how much they can influence the final decision through them. That's it for now, and we can discuss more later.
Thanks, Nanke, for this presentation. And if you stop sharing your screen, then I have the opportunity to introduce the last speaker of tonight from the side of the Urban Fellows. That is Markha Valenta. She's assistant professor at the University College Utrecht. Valenta's work takes shape at the intersection of politics, anthropology, and history, focusing on forms of public religion, citizenship, and social movements by denigrated minorities. She's currently working on the project The Citizenship of the Non-Citizen. She will speak about. She's at NIAS at this very moment. How does Amsterdam give shape to the citizenship of the undocumented migrants, and how are they approached as inhabitants of the capital? Markha, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen here. Okay. There, and just 2 seconds. Yes. Okay. Oh, and well, you can't see me. Actually, I should have said this when you could see me, but I just wanted to say both specifically with this project, thank you very much to NIAS and to the municipality. I'm very thrilled to be doing this. And in particular, in this case, because I myself am a migrant to the Netherlands and to Amsterdam. And that has everything to do with also that I, in a certain sense, right, was a queer refugee, in that when I came here, I could establish a relation and a family life that my partner couldn't establish. You'll hear me getting emotional, this is crazy, but that my partner couldn't establish with me in the United States because our relationship wouldn't be recognized there. So I've experienced the hospitality of Amsterdam and of the Netherlands, and I'm very grateful for that. And in a certain sense, my project comes out of that because essentially what I want is that the kind of hospitality that I've experienced is something that is there for everybody. Also those who don't have my level of education, who don't come from the United States, who aren't white, but this really be a kind of universal hospitality. So the project is called The Citizenship of the Non-Citizen, and I have as a subtitle for the citizen yet to come. And what I mean by that is I want to use that notion of the citizen yet to come as a kind of Archimedean orientation or perspective point, sort of the point from which I look at this in 3 senses. So first of all, temporally, the citizen yet to come, those who are already here and who are waiting to become citizens, whether in the national sense or in the urban sense, those geographically who are elsewhere and are yet to arrive, right? There will be many more migrants to come, and also conceptually, in the sense that I think our notion, our understanding of what citizenship entails and can be and will be, is undergoing a process of change. It's a necessary change, and that we are very much in need of a planetary citizen form that we have yet to invent for the future generations to be born, right? So viewing this problem of urban citizenship of the undocumented from the perspective of a world that we might imagine, in which not only human rights but planetary citizenship are universal birthrights. You have a kind of very basic citizenship at the moment of birth, which you carry with you regardless of what geographic point you might be at. How do we get from here, right, which is we have currently a migrant regime that has built into it the danger of death as a component of the regulation of migration to one in which we see migration, right, as a human right. And the question, the reason that I want to have sort of this perspective of the future is not idealism, though I know I'm sounding very American, very idealist, and I think that's a good infusion to have as a migrant into Amsterdam and the Netherlands, right? But very practical realism in relative to, in fact, you know, the first person I heard talking about this was Audre Lorde, a famous African-American queer lesbian poet who wrote a well-known essay called On the Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House, right? And a reformulation of what Albert Einstein had said some decades earlier. Essentially, you can't solve our problems with the same thinking we used when creating them. So that notion of let's experiment with thinking outside of the box as a way of getting outside the box. From the perspective of the citizen yet to come, cities are essential to finding an answer to this question of how we're going to do this. We're in a time of urbanization, right? We know cities across the world are growing, and the cities that are growing are driven by migration, and that migration and the growth of cities is driving our economies. Also in cities like Amsterdam, and if you look right on the map of the right, you see something that, you know, I assume you overwhelmingly are very, very aware of already, that where is it that we see migrants? They come to the Dutch cities on the west coast of the Netherlands, and then in the darker places, these are all Dutch cities, yeah, across the map. Now, when I'm thinking about this, I'm using as my starting point a concept that's very, very familiar to anyone who's ever touched on urban studies, right? The notion of the right to the city, from the French thinker Henri Lefebvre. And the basic fundamental notions of that is that all denizens of the city should give shape to the city, right? It's a vision for the democratization and for the strengthening of urban citizenship. And that in the process of giving the denizens of the city the means to give shape to the city, right, that entails a shrinking of the market and the state in terms of their influence, and that this happens through collective claims that are made by mobilized individuals, building on everyday practices of creativity of people in all sectors of society, and that this in turn is a way of renewing political life, and this touches also on a number of the things Nanke was talking about, right? And it also renews not only political life, but the city itself as a form that unites the past, the present, and the possible, right? The city yet to come and the refugee yet to come, the citizen yet to come. And I start here, I'm going to start with, in terms of perspective, with a short story. This is a photograph that won an international photography prize of Amadou Sulaima. And in 2016, he was in a little boat with 117 other migrants on the Mediterranean, very much in danger. And then they were rescued. And when they were rescued, there was an Iranian-Spanish photographer on board, and he wanted to give faces to these anonymous migrants whose numbers we see, but whose faces and stories we don't. And so he took this picture. And the question I want to really keep in mind, Amadou Soumaila, and that question of, does Amadou Soumaila have a right to the city? Does he have a right to the city of Amsterdam? Does he have a right to urban citizenship? What would we say if he would come through the gates of the city of Amsterdam today, and here and now, right? And the question is, who decides? Does Amadou himself decide? Does the city of Amsterdam decide? Does the Dutch nation state, the European Union, right, or the United Nations? And we know that right now the situation is such that Amadou and the city of Amsterdam both, in fact, have little to say in terms of formal citizenship, right, and that the power to say is primarily in the hands of the Dutch state, right, and of European Union states who decide whether or not his asylum requests are going to be honored. Now, the building in of death and precarity into the migrant regime that we currently have, right, is something that is not specific just to the Mediterranean or to our situation here in Amsterdam, but it is part of a much larger kind of a logic. And Zygmunt Bauman, a survivor of the Holocaust, wrote very movingly about this in terms of wasted lives, right, that we have a contemporary politics of waste, of discardable, a class of discardable humans that is built into the processes of modernization, right? We produce wasted lives, superfluous populations of migrants and refugees and outcasts, which is to say that the condition of Amadou Soumaila isn't accidental, it isn't individual, but it's structural and collective. Right, and so what takes shape in Amsterdam, where we have somewhere between 10,000 to 30,000 undocumented, is something that is very specific to our city, while at the same time it extends far beyond it, not only far beyond it within the Netherlands or even within Europe, but across the planet. And at the very same time, right, we have to keep in mind that there's a parallel development in citizen regimes, that citizenship also now is for sale. It's a 25 billion a year industry, which is very much targeted at those who escape, right, those wasted lives by virtue of their wealth. So the migration regime has taken on this neoliberal characteristic of increasing inequality that we also see within our societies. For the privileged, you have mobility and deregulation. For the poor, you have increased precarity, exclusion, and surveillance, right? And then there's a final point that I want to bring in terms of creating a context, which is that the migration, there's also a political historical element, which is that the crisis has less to do with absolute numbers as with the nature of those who are migrating and the ways in which they are. And that in fact, that there's kind of deep shock that Europe is undergoing because of an inversion. We're very, very used to the notion of Europeans going out into the world, right? But not used to, and in fact, modernity itself could not imagine the brown world coming into white Europe and transforming it. So Europe as the transformer of the world, but now the shock of that world itself transforming Europe. And at the same time, elements of migration have become much more grassroots, right? Much less controlled either by empires or states or corporations as they historically have been. And we are now under new conditions of egalitarian democracy in the sense that whether you look at the US and the ways in which voting restrictions were lifted starting in the 1960s, or the ways in which we've had increasing democratization and egalitarianism, right, relative to colonial possessions and so forth in the Netherlands and across Europe, right, we have a kind of new multicultural, multiracial democracies taking shape where migrants get access to political power in ways that are very unsettling. And you can think about the controversy that accompanied Bushalik, for example, and the deep, distress that this generates among portions of the Netherlands. So what alternatives?
Markha, can you be very, very brief, because you really have come to a closure. Yeah.
Okay. So my project is to map what's happening now, and I have some primary communities I'm going to be engaging: undocumented Amsterdammers, the Amsterdam municipality, and NGOs. The undocumented Amsterdammers, it's a very diverse group, and so I'll be talking to as many of these different groups as possible. At the same time, the municipality itself is also very diverse. Who has played a very, very significant role here in addressing these issues. You also have a report that just come out from the Ombudsman. You also have people who are advisors and working in the municipality, like Peter Frieler, and you have different NGOs that engage with undocumented migrants. I'll be meeting with all of them to get an understanding of the dynamics between these different agents, to work on increasing the visibility of the undocumented, to bring in examples from sanctuary cities and cities of refuge outside, to see what can be applied to Amsterdam, and with the goal of developing a vision for citizenship of the non-citizen in Amsterdam that draws directly from the experience of these different actors and makes possible for us to imagine a city that is more just and more democratic for all of us. Thank you.
Markha, thanks so much. And indeed, I have to apologize that you didn't have more time because, of course, it's very interesting. There are 3 short but rich presentations. Anouk, who already finished her research and already has a publication. Nanke just told us that her publication will be out, I think, next week. And Markha is in the midst of her research. We'd like to hear the response by Rutger Groot-Wassink. And let me briefly, if necessary, introduce him. He's the Deputy Mayor of the Municipality of Amsterdam and member of the political party GroenLinks. Since 2018, he is responsible for social affairs, democratization, and diversity. He's one of the initiators of the Urban Citizenship Fellowship. I heard one thing, Alderman Wassink, that you should at least be there at critical moments. Well, this is such a critical moment. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to be here. I'm not quite sure if this is a critical moment. I have strong memories of something like a town hall meeting in Amsterdam Zuid, where a lot of people were very frustrated about the coming of an undocumented shelter, which is doing fine, by the way. So let me start with two remarks. First of all, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, everybody can come back who has been speaking. Otherwise, we are just the 2 of us there. So everybody switches on his or her camera, and then Rutger continues. Please go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Let me start with 2 remarks. First of all, excuse my English. I'm not that used to having talks like this, and I think that in an academic context, bilingual talks are way more common than in politics. And second, my second remark would be that I'm very thankful for the presentations, and I'm very thankful for the work that has been done and that will be delivered. But I won't be able to respond or to reflect on that in the proper wealth and broadness that I think that fit these papers. So let me start with that. And yes, I'm very interested in the things that have been presented here, especially what Nanke also said. Be there, but which I like. But I think that what was even more valuable is make clear what these boundaries are. And in a sense, I am redesigning the policy on participation in Amsterdam, because what I've seen is that there is no transparency, there's no clarity of what is asked of people to participate. So in a sense that these boundaries aren't set straight. So there was a lot of recognition for me, and I would very much like to continue talks with all the 3 to learn even more, because it also on the last talk, if you look at the undocumented, there's I think a lot of work to be done and a lot of ways that we should cooperate more. But in general, I think that if you look at democratization, and if you look at and I think that the first and the last talk were also very, very strong on that. That it's if you see democratization as an increase of inclusion, which I find is one of the keys to true democratization, that it has to be an inclusive process. Then I think that in a sense, we're on a quest, because we don't have a blueprint. We don't have a blueprint on what to do. We don't have a blueprint when it comes to, for example, healthcare and the OKTs, and how to approach people with cultural sensitiveness. And we don't have a blueprint how to help people who are undocumented, how to help migrants. We don't have blueprints for that, and sometimes, especially when it comes to the undocumented, we have strong enemies, like the nation state, like several parties in the nation state, who think that Amsterdam is cuckoo for the way we're working on that. But I still believe that. I think that one of the central issues for my politics is that I feel that I'm on a quest to redesign, in a sense, the relationships between, let's say, public administration, the market, and citizens. And I think that these reports and these investigations can help me with that. And I'm, in a sense, looking for a way to amplify the voices that are the least heard, and especially the undocumented are a key group in that. So I won't be able to pledge enough honor to all these works, and I very much would like to continue these talks and have further sessions. But I think that this evening and also these researches show that it was very fruitful for us and very useful for us to start the cooperation with you guys, because I'm very sure that you can contribute to even more and better policies for the city of Amsterdam. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Alderman, for these words. And I think this is very much reciprocal, that we from NIAS side also are very satisfied with the results till now, with the 3 fellows that have been working, and Markha that is working at this moment. I do invite, we have a little bit of time, I do invite questions by the audience. We do know, or we expect actually, that there are scholars among you, there are civil servants, there might be social professionals, there might be citizens, and next to the other identities I just mentioned. So whoever wants to raise a question, please do that. You can do it by using the Q&A in the Zoom. You can do it on YouTube, and you can do it on Twitter by using the hashtag NIAS Talk. So various ways. It looks as if we have hours for discussion. That's actually not true. But let's see whether there are some questions that you want to raise. Perhaps one observation from my side before we go to the questions. I was not surprised, but I was impressed actually by the fact that in a political context where there is so much goodwill for further democratization, and a situation where there's a close cooperation actually between all a lot of societal partners and politicians, that in that context, the best intentions do not always result in the best things, right? So a lot of the things that have been said, for instance, by Anouk, all those new welfare state arrangements with the best intentions, but then it seems so hard to discuss questions of race and ethnicity, right? So it's not that people deny the importance, I guess. It is indeed, as Rutger said, that's what Alderman said, is that it is not on that level. It's far more the level that we do not exactly have the correct policies or professional practices. It's not because it is easy, it is just because it is so difficult to touch upon those very sensitive points. So I really want to thank all the 3 of you, that you show how it's far more about tensions and paradoxes than it is about easy recipes. And my second observation would be that I found it courageous that in that context, all of you want to come up with policy advice, how the municipality can do better. It says something about your commitment, right? That you say, well, I really want the municipality to know certain things. Having said that, I do see that in the Q&A there are a couple of questions. And let me see whether I can start with a question. This one is for Nanke, and also to link the talk of Anouk and Markha. Is one of the problems not with the politicization of participation that actually politicians are hesitant to really shift power, right? So because you said, for instance, Nanke, that politicians then should put clear priorities, but then it is of course the question whether citizens still want to participate if it is very limited what they want to say. So is the question here is it not more fundamental that politicians should perhaps keep less power for themselves and more for others, and really give power to citizens? Is that perhaps an underlying problem? Nanke, please go ahead.
Yeah, of course, that is an underlying problem, and that is actually more a question to Rutger than to me, because indeed, if you want to really shift power to the citizens, then the mandate has to be somewhere else. So that's also why the question about the borough administration, the central city, and then the citizen, who has the mandate for what and where is influence. But my comment about politicians making a decision is also giving people power, because this allows you to know whether you want to vote for this person again, right? You cannot vote for a civil servant. So if the civil servant is telling you why these decisions are made and where the priorities are, you can do very little if you are in a participation process. So if this political discussion is going on in the city much more clearly and showing where the priorities are, then at least citizens have a choice. And third point, citizens not wanting to participate anymore is sometimes a very good thing, right? Look at the K-buurt and the citizens deciding, hey, we are going with a participation strike, or citizens saying, hey, I don't participate in this, I will start a social movement. There is another line of power there. It doesn't always have to go into the participation process. So I would be much more open about the different ways in which citizens could have power if a real shift of power is not yet possible, because, well, that's up to Rutger, basically.
Perhaps one more question for you, Nanke, then I move on to Anouk, because this is related, I think. Imrad Verhoeven is asking, because now you said something about the politicians, right? But what are the implications of your findings for the planning professionals?
Yeah, the implications for them are also very high. I think that the planning professionals can take a role in that participation process in many, well, very detailed ways that I will describe in the report. But I think that it's good for them to also know that they have the ability to shift their responsibility back to the politicians sometimes and to do less, because they are very often the ones who have to do all of it. And then they don't have any decision-making power. So it's also frustrating for them to be in that position and to not have that kind of mandate, or not even be able to really discuss where the priorities are. So I would say for them, do sometimes less and use strategies that include these emotions and so on more.
Thanks. Caroline actually is asking a question to all three urban fellows, but I will mostly raise them to Anouk. Caroline asked, Anouk, can you elaborate on the dilemmas that civil servants, so there are civil servants, again, face in these processes, as you describe in your essay? So perhaps you can slightly elaborate on that, Anouk.
Yes, I will just briefly summarize. So in the essay, I highlight from this kind of welfare 2.0 three dilemmas, or three topics. One is the horizontal relation that I just talked about. This idea that you want to have that kind of collaborative relation, but at the same time you have an institutional power, and you also have a professional duty. And with parents and children, this really can you can come in conflict with parents, and the way to think about this. And parents know this, and they may be afraid of you, and so on. So to discuss this more openly, I think, would be important, rather than act as if everything is nice. And I heard a lot of key stock phrases among parent and child team professionals, like the person didn't arrive there when they didn't want to go. So I mean, that kind of, sketches it. Another one is this idea of the neighborhood and being close by. And as an urban anthropologist, I ask, what is a neighborhood? Whom do you meet, right? I mean, who is there? Like, what is outside? So outside the walls of the office, but then, right? So that's another question, a kind of dream of transparency, which is not real. And the third one is this human face. And one of the dilemmas there is, or the question there is, who is that human face, right? So if it's a white man who's a bit older, you know, from a working class background, they will relate differently than, say, a younger professional of color who has a very different connection, reaches out to different audiences, is also kind of a different face for the municipalities. I think that's an important thing to think of. And a third one related to that is that if the professionals are kind of foregrounded as the face of the municipality or of a service or a welfare program, and the welfare program or the service or the municipality doesn't live up to its promises, or the system malfunctions, like has been happening in the youth system, they really suffer. So a human face to welfare is nice, but then you also have to arrange what happens behind it, right? So those were kind of the dilemmas that I saw in the new welfare for professionals themselves.
Great, thanks so much. It really shows that how many insights, right, your research provides. The questions from Markha are, of course, related to the way and the type of presentation she gave. That is was, of course, not now building on the results of her research in Amsterdam, because that's she's carrying out. But there are questions nonetheless about what you expect. And what does it mean? What can your research project mean for citizens of the future? So there are questions related to generations. I'm kind of interestingly surprised. So what might your research project tell about the youth of Amsterdam? Somebody else actually asked more of about the older generation. But also the type of advice you're going to give, Markha. Are you developing a blueprint for how the city should welcome? Will it be, in that sense, a normative blueprint? What is the kind of output you expect?
Yeah, okay, I'll try and also be concise, yes. Right? So in terms of the future, I think you see two kinds of developments happening at the same time. So there's a tremendous diversity. And if I look, for example, at my daughter who's going to an Amsterdam school, and she's been actually in all three levels, MAVO, HAVO, and VWO. So, you know, you see, you know, in MAVO, it was a class of 30 students and only 3 of them had 2 Dutch parents. And now that by the time she's made her way up to VWO, it's much wider. And those are what I see there is 2 things happening. On the one hand, a tremendous mixing of different cultures, and the students, the kids finding all different kinds of ways of engaging with that, from joking and debate and conflicts, but really working out a very actually complex, nuanced way of doing diversity. And then at the same time, we have structures of discrimination. And those 2 things are in tension with one another. And what we have right now is a city of Amsterdam that's really committed to finding ways to address those structures of exclusion and discrimination. And it depends, of course, on what the political developments are, but cities in general, right, are at the forefront of doing that all across the world. So that's one thing in terms of where's the youth going. And then in terms of what I don't see myself developing a blueprint in part because I think, you know, because both the municipality and the different organizations of undocumented and NGOs, you know, have been doing this for quite a while, and they have a lot of experience and insight. So it's not so much that I want to tell them what to do, but what I want to do from the idea of community engagement is I want to learn from what they're doing, and then with them get an understanding of what kinds of contributions can I make. And where I see my contributions is that as an academic, I can do I'm very good at dealing with a lot of information and organizing that so I can create a map of what is going on at different scales and in different sites, and how these different things relate to one another. I can bring in outside knowledge of what's happening in other cities, in other countries, other continents, and see what can function as a resource here. I can contribute to the kinds of projects that are taking place now, particularly, you know, the ways in which the undocumented themselves are talking about it, and the way I've heard Groot-Wassing talk about it, creating intensifying the visibility and the audibility of the undocumented as a way of really consolidating their citizenship in Amsterdam.
Great, thanks so much, Markha. That was indeed a concise answer to an enormous question. We are almost running out of time. I'm just watching at Caroline. She doesn't know that whether she perhaps will make a kind of final observation. Is there anything, Caroline, that you think that you were surprised by tonight, or something that you want to say as a kind of conclusion? Otherwise, I draw some conclusions, but very briefly myself.
Well, maybe one thing that I think is very interesting, that in all your talks, also the reflection on the current practice seems to be very vital. And that in this reflection between the different perspectives, maybe we can find new forms. Meanwhile, the power is, of course, very strong. That's always to analyze that the power is there, yes. To say we have to politicize, sure. But how do we find new ways to address this power? So it becomes more beneficial. Power is also strength. It's not only, you know, bringing things down. It's not only repression or oppression. It's also empowerment. So I wonder, and that would be really interesting to reflect more, how we can make sure that your analysis in the end results in empowerment for people who are not citizen yet, for civil servants who are in all these dilemmas, and for people who take the trouble to participate. So that would be my last question. And
Thanks.
we leave it at that.
Yeah, and we are not going to collect answers to that question because we have 3 minutes left. I want to thank all of you. I think the presentations and, well, let's frame it in a different way. The research that's carried out and that is still being carried out at this very moment is also so productive because of the close cooperation between the municipality that gave the researchers also access to all kinds of practices that they have studied. So that is from the perspective of NIAS and research in general, I think it has been very, very fruitful. And at the same time, the researchers could frame the questions and research what they want to research, right? So it is a balancing act between independence of research and at the same time being committed and involved with the municipality and with policymakers. The program we are discussing, the Urban Citizenship program, actually contains 6 fellows and 3 themes. So democratization, that might become clear, have become clear today. Diversity is the second, and actually Markha is the first of the 2 diversity fellows. And then next year we will also have 2 fellows that will deal with citizenship education. So 3 aspects. And the good news is that we still are looking for researchers who want to perhaps become the 5th and 6th urban fellow. So if you go to the NIAS website, you will see that there is a vacancy open till April 15. So if you're interested, send in your CV and whatever is asked for, and you might become one of the others, the upcoming fellows. For now, we have a 3-year program between NIAS and the municipality of Amsterdam, and as I said, 6 fellows in total. One can look back to what was discussed today at openresearch.amsterdam, if I'm correct, Caroline. Yeah. So people can have a look there. And the final thing is, and that shows how diverse NIAS is, that the next NIAS talk, so here at SPI 25, is on May 17. But then we discuss the presence of the art world in the digital world. So, well, you can, of course, make links between the themes, but that shows also the richness and diversity of NIAS, if that doesn't sound overly self-congratulatory. Thanks so much. We have to stop here. Thanks to the Urban Fellows. Thanks to Caroline for introducing and helping developing the program. Particularly thanks to the Alderman, who not only helped develop this program, but also gave his first reflections. And as I said, this is the first presentation, and also that we feel that we want to give back, that we feel to be accountable for what we did. But many more meetings to come, and at least 2 more SPI meetings that will deal in the coming years with the outcomes of the Urban Citizenship Program. Thanks so much. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for raising questions, for the Q&A, for the questions raised. I hope that we answered most of them, and have a good night. And well, I don't know whether I should advise, have a look at the national politics in the Netherlands, because that's perhaps not very good for your mood. See all of you.